what were some of
Hmm.
the role models, or who were some of the role models that you looked up to, and how did that frame some of your perspective in your journey as well?
Yeah. There's been a lot of change in terms of the type of women role models that are available to people now versus in the late 80s and early 90s. Our reference points were much more limited. And even still they are in a lot of ways, but you still hear things about this is the first woman
Yeah.
to do this. This is the first black woman to do this, the first Asian American woman to do this. I
First
mean, you
president.
still
That's not happened
where is she?
yet.
I know. I am dying for the day that we get a woman president because I did think about that in elementary school. You
Mhm.
see the faces of
Yeah.
the presidents, and there's no woman. There
Yeah.
just isn't. And it does affect girls. And as much as it sounds kind of like this trite thing of, like, we need a woman in there, like, it really does affect the perception that both boys and girls have about women as leaders.
Yeah.
And I mentioned boys too very purposely because it's not just about the women knowing that they can go do it, it's having a society that accepts that. And so you can't just train the girls to be strong and be leaders and be that. You have to train the boys to accept strong women leaders. And I think that's part of what is happening right now is, we spent decades telling girls that they could be anything, but we didn't tell boys how to be in a world where girls could be anything. And it felt, I think a lot of that messaging felt like a zero sum where if girls are going
Mm.
to get those jobs, the boys are not going to get those jobs. And it created a lot of anger, and I think it needs to be more of an even dialogue on, yes, men still have a place, men are still leaders, women can also be leaders. That's where I think we need to shift that conversation. And there are certainly specific women who I think made a difference where, um, Ruth Bader Ginsburg, I cried when she died because she was somebody who, was one of those kind of that one of those few women that had made it to the very top of her field in the Supreme Court. And, I remember learning about the Supreme Court justices and Sandra Day O'Connor and the early women in the Supreme Court. And even though we don't have a woman president yet, we have some of those women who have gotten to those highest levels of leadership, at least in the judicial branch. Within business, though, I mean, there's still relatively very few women CEOs of Fortune 500 companies. And, the only ones that I really remember hearing about was, and this was even later, there was a woman CEO of Xerox. And then later, once we got into tech, kind of early in my career, was when Lean In was published. I think Lean In was published when I was 22. And so that really put Sheryl Sandberg on this pedestal. And I think, there's her, and then there's a few other women who kind of become like the voices of the women.
Mm.
But what I hate about that is it's just a few people who are meant to represent everyone versus, the 90% of Fortune 500 C suite that is still men. And so we kind of get overly reliant on one or two women voices as the women voices. And I think it still needs to expand to have different and varied voices amongst women instead of kind of the token one woman that makes it to the top kind of archetype. And I will say, I still had role models who were men as well.
Yeah.
So I would still look up, I very much look up to my dad on his entrepreneurial journey, and he really completely changed the economic circumstance of our family and himself. He's been very successful. And, there are many other stories of men who have done things that are amazing. And I can still relate to those as just a driven person, but I think it would help to have more examples of other types of people who do those things too.
Yeah.